Okay, I wish this sure be an aid and a refuah for all the volume of Klal Yisrael. Kevin, teach us.
Amen. Okay, so the 3 weeks starts this week, leading up to Tisha B'Av. So I just decided to do something earlier than usual. I usually do it like a day before. I thought just let me do something today. So it actually starts when on Thursday we have the fast of Tammuz, which is leading up to the Tisha B'Av, which will also be on a Wednesday night, Thursday. So it actually starts this Wednesday night, the 3 weeks. And the fast of Tammuz is on Thursday, 12-hour fast, and it'll obviously be short in South Africa and longer here because it's summer here. So just a couple of laws and customs for the 3 weeks. Certain things can't be done which increase simcha. So weddings and playing instruments, listening to music, people shouldn't listen to music, especially if it brings them joy. I think there's a machloket about music without lyrics, like orchestral music.
No, there's a problem with orchestral. There's no problem with a cappella.
A cappella, yes. Okay, that's right. So, but people do have engagement parties and bristlers, but without entertainment. I mean, you just don't have weddings during the 3 weeks. So one should also try avoid putting on new clothing or new fruit which hasn't been consumed throughout the year, which requires a Shechianu blessing, because Shechianu brings you joy. And then one other major issue, one major thing that people have to try comply with is not to take haircuts or shaving. Okay, with regards to shaving, some people there's a bit of leniency with certain people. This is Sephardim permit haircuts and shaving until the week of Tisha B'Av. And that week of Tisha B'Av is actually from the Motzei Shabbos till Tisha B'Av Eve. So that's considered the week of Tisha B'Av in the 9 days that they're lenient with haircuts and shaving. But as far as I know, if someone has an important business deal that could be lost, or then I think there are leniencies in terms of shaving, more so than haircuts. But one should always consult an Orthodox rabbi, learned one, as we have access. All of us have access to such people for your questions.
One question is that I'm not talking about if one goes to a gym where there's background music in a gym, because you can't do anything. But if you've got your own home gym and you train better with music, not that it's used to cheer you up, but it's actually you need it for training purposes. Listen, it's always how from you are, because you ask a very from people, if music's in the background in a gym, they say, what are you going to gym for? It depends how orthodox you go. So it would be interesting. I actually want to ask, because if you do gym with music, like either running or weights or whatever, it actually does help. It really does help. So I don't know. I need to ask.
In the background, or like on your.
No. If you go to a gym, you can't change it because it's the background.
Yeah, but you're not going there for the music. It just happens to be.
No. Well, the reason why there's music in gym is it actually helps you train. In other words, there's a purpose. I wonder. They might not be lenient. I'm not sure. All right, Kabb, that was important. Let's go to the Gemara share. So what we did is we did touch on all these issues, but a lot of you weren't feeling well and used it for power naps and recovery, and you did put in a concerted effort, but we're just going through some of the concepts very, very quickly. So I'm going to fly through it. It should, if you're having a deja vu, there's a very good reason, but I'm flying through it. So the Gemara focuses on the statement that Rav cited, that if one says to his fellow, a man of mine is in your possession, and the other responds that you do not have anything in my possession. In other words, he's prepared to swear to that effect. And afterwards, witnesses come and attest to his guilt. He is exempt from payment. For it's stated, and his owner shall accept it, and he shall not pay. So this teaches that once the owner has received an oath, the defendant no longer pays money. So Rava elucidates Rav's ruling. Rava said, the ruling is reasonable regarding a loan, which is given to the borrower to be spent. Since the original money no longer exists, and the debtor would be required to pay with his own funds, it's reasonable to interpret the verse, and he shall not pay, as exempting him. But as for a deposit, it always remains in the possession of its owner, and is therefore unreasonable to interpret, and he shall not pay, as exempting the custodian from returning it to the rightful owner. But by God, Rav stated his ruling even regarding a deposit, for it's written there in the verse that Rav expounded, where it was written regarding a deposit. So all we are saying is there is that the one thing that I don't understand is that if you borrow money, you have to pay it back. So I don't see why it's reasonable that if somebody's prepared to take an oath that he did not borrow the money, he should be exempted if witnesses come. So one of the things that we will learn is that it's not so straightforward. If you've got one witness that comes against you, and you testify and prepared to take an oath, it's one against one. Two coming against you, it's not so clear cut, and it depends under what circumstance that oath works. So regarding a loan, the reason why they use that as a logical construct is that the original money lent is no longer in the hands of the debtor, whereas a custodian has reserved the object for himself, and at no point does it ever leave the possession of the original owner. So that's where the question comes in. So we're saying then, how do we know that if the unpaid custodian takes an oath, he didn't take the article, that it exempts him, and he shall not pay if witnesses come afterwards? And we are saying is because Rav expounded that verse regarding a depositor, an unpaid custodian, in the actual pasuk itself. And that pasuk was in the pasuk of the custodian. It wasn't regarding loans. So it does also include that. Okay. So obviously there's a challenge. I'm going to give you what the challenges were. Rav Nachman was sitting and teaching this ruling of Rav. Rav Achaba Manume challenged Rav Nachman from the following Mishnah. It's in 108b. If one said to an unpaid custodian, where's my deposit that I entrusted to your care? And the custodian replied, it was lost, and I'm exempt from payment. And the owner said to him, I adjure you that your response is true. And the custodian said, Amen, thus accepting the oath. It's as if the custodian took an oath in that regard when he responded Amen. And afterwards, witnesses testify against the custodian that he consumed it himself. The custodian pays only the principal, which is the value of the deposit. So what is this, guys? It seems as if this discussion with Rav Achaba Manume, who challenged Rav Nachman's interpretation of Rav's ruling of Rav, is that he's saying, no, it's not the case, because we can already see that if a false oath was sworn and witnesses come and testify against the custodian that he consumed the item himself, and there's two witnesses, the custodian pays only the principal. Okay, which proves that witnesses trump testimony. However, if the custodian admitted on his own accord that he swore falsely, he pays the principal and one for surcharge and brings an asham offering. So even afterwards of his own admission, if the custodian says he felt bad and he swore falsely, he still has to pay the principal, the one for surcharge and asham. Either way, this is a proof against Rav Nachman's interpretation of Rava interpreting Rav. So we can see that a custodian remains liable to pay even after he swears, providing there's evidence against him. So what's Rav Nachman's answer to this? So he said, we are dealing here with a special case. It's a case where the custodian swore outside the court. Okay? And that is an oath that's taken outside the court doesn't have the gravity to free the swearer from the plaintiff's claim against him, even if the oath is required biblically. So the verse that Rav stated as the source of the exemption refers specifically to a court-imposed oath. That's according to Rashi. And when the court imposes a biblical oath, and it requires the swearer to invoke the name of Hashem, to hold a sacred object like the Torah scroll, and while he's uttering the oath, the rabbis forewarn him as to the dire consequences of swearing falsely, that's enough to indemnify him if he's still prepared to take a chance, to where if witnesses come against him, it protects the custodian. Well, at least in this world. In Shemaim, he's got a big problem. So Rav Acha by Manyume counters to Rav Nachman, and he said, well, if you're saying it's outside the court, you've got to look at the Mishnah's latter clause, which states that if the owner said to the unpaid custodian, where's my deposit? They entrusted to your care, and the custodian replied, it was stolen, and I am exempt from payment because it was stolen from me. And the owner then said to him, I adjure you that your response is true. And the custodian said, Amen. And afterwards, witnesses testify against the custodian that he stole it himself. The custodian pays the twofold payment. So what's the significance? Is that if an unpaid custodian exempts himself from liability by claiming and swearing falsely that the deposit has been stolen, and then witnesses come and say that he stole it himself, he's liable to kefil. Now, we know that as far as the kefil is concerned, in Shmot, in Exodus chapter 22, verse 7, that only a court-imposed oath that is actually taken in court renders a custodian liable to kefil. So this seems like a proof against Rav Nachman, who turns around and says, no, well, the oath was taken outside of court. How do we know this? Because in Shmot, it says the householder, who's the custodian, shall approach the court to swear. Whomever the court finds guilty shall pay twofold to his fellow. So, obviously, if the custodian admitted of his own accord that he swore falsely, he pays the principal and the one for surcharge, and he brings an ashram offering. So, Rav Acha Bar Manyume basically said, now, if it should enter your mind that the Mishnah is dealing with a case that the custodian swore outside of court, is there ever a case where any twofold payment for an oath is taken outside of the court? And we know not. He proved it from the Shmot. So Rav Nachman replies to him. He said, look, I could answer you that the first clause of the Mishnah deals with a case where the defendant swore outside of court, which was, by the way, guys, just to pay the kefil payment. And the latter clause deals with a case where he swore in court. Okay? And he said, listen, I can say that because then if I say it's outside of the court, he only has to pay the principal. You're saying he has to pay the kefil. I'm not saying he has to pay the kefil. And in a case where he comes clean afterwards and he what do you call it himself? He feels guilty and he says that he committed perjury. In that case, he's confessing himself, and that could be a case sworn in court. However, he said, listen, I'm not going to force you with such a stretched answer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to explain it the way you want to. If you want to force it and say that it's kefil and that can only occur within a courtroom setting, there still isn't a difficulty. Because in the first clause, we're dealing with the case where the plaintiff jumped up and actually personally adjured the custodian before the court imposed the oath upon him. So what should have happened is that the plaintiff should have let the court do its business instead of jumping up to the defendant and said, I know you took it, swear to me you didn't take it. And the defendant said, I didn't take it. And he said, I'm prepared to say amen. Okay. So he interfered with the court process. Whereas in the latter clause, we're dealing with a case where the plaintiff did not jump up and down and personally adjure the custodian, but allowed the court to impose the oath upon him. And in the second case was where the defendant felt bad about swearing falsely, and therefore he has to pay the principal, the 1/5, the asham offering. Now, in this case, guys, I was thinking about a problem on the weekend, which means that the plaintiff actually did himself a favor. Let me tell you why. If the court imposed oath, now guys, maybe you could answer this. If the court imposed oath actually indemnifies the custodian, where if witnesses come afterwards, according to Rav Nachman, he is protected once he's done his false oath. And it protects him against witnesses afterwards. Because it's imposed by the court, the best thing the plaintiff ever did was break that court protection and get up and say to the defendant, I don't believe you. Make an oath right now that you never take it, or I adjure you to tell me you didn't take it and say amen. Because what the plaintiff did here actually, guys, is help himself. Because it doesn't then indemnify the defendant when witnesses come against the defendant. So the plaintiff in this case, guys, was lucky. He wasn't unfortunately into the court process. Do you agree? He was actually lucky. Do you see that? Gav, do you see that?
Listen, I'm in no state to see anything, but I'm doing my best I can.
Okay.
No, I'm not feeling well. I told you earlier, I'm not feeling great at all.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. So there's a whole conversation relating to the preceding answer.
I heard everything you said. I just can't give it over. There's no worries.
Okay. So Rami Bava Kamma said to Rav Nachman, okay, let's see what you're saying, right? I know you don't agree with Rav. So why must you pledge yourself and defend Rav's ruling? So Rav Nachman said, listen, I'm coming just to explain the opinion of Rav and to clarify this is how Rav interprets the Mishnah. Okay. Now, it's very difficult to understand how anybody can disagree with Rav, the Gemara says, because there's an actual source for his ruling. And the verse actually comes to teach a different rule, that all who swear under biblical law swear and do not pay. So we expound the phrase, its owner shall accept the oath and the defendant shall not pay, as teaching the one upon whom it swears would be incumbent to pay if he loses the case, is the one who swears. So all we are saying is there, very, very simply, that the onus is on the person that wishes to extract money from his fellow to bring the evidence. So he can't take an oath to say that the defendant actually stole the money, because it's in his interest to collect. He has to bring evidence. The defendant is entitled to use the name of Hashem and swears to his innocence unless there are two witnesses that come against him. However, as we learned, if the defendant is a criminal like a robber or has a track record of perjury, in that case, we allow the plaintiff to swear that his claim is true. But generally, it teaches that the defendant is the one that swears under biblical law. So there's another challenge to Rav's ruling. Rav Hamnuna challenged Rav from the following Mishnah, which deals with one who swears falsely in denial of a monetary claim. Okay. And it's in Shavuos 36b. If the plaintiff had the defendant adjured 5 times regarding the same claim, either in court or outside of court, and the defendant denied the claim made against him, he is liable to the 1/5 surcharge and the asham offering for each and every false oath of denial. Now, what we are saying is it's not in the same court. It's basically where the plaintiff took the defendant to court in 5 different courts because he was so sure that the custodian is lying. Okay? And each and every time the custodian lied. And for that, if he ever admits to the truth, he is liable to the 1/5 surcharge and asham for each and every time, according to why? Well, according to whom? Well, Rav Shimon said that the reason for this is because each time he was adjured, the defendant could have retracted and admitted that indeed he owes the money and is liable to pay, and every denial under the oath is significant. Okay. So basically, if the denial is inconsequential from a monetary standpoint, there's no penalty. But Rabbi Shimon says, guys, in our case, each oath is significant. Theoretically, the defendant could have confessed and he would have been obligated to pay. So each oath is deemed a new denial of monetary obligation, and the defendant incurs a penalty for each one. It's not the same case again and again because it was taken to different courts. Now, you can't say that the Mishnah deals with a case where the plaintiff jumped up and personally adjured the defendant, because the Mishnah states if the plaintiff had the defendant adjured, meaning that he had a court imposed the oath, you also can't say that the Mishnah deals with a case where he swore outside of court, because the Mishnah says in court. Okay, so what are we saying here? The whole reason we bring in this proof is because this is a proof against Rav Nachman to a certain degree. Well, it's actually a proof against Rav. Why? Because if you say the plaintiff jumped up and down and said that I want the defendant to swear to me and never took it, and then that is not a court-imposed oath. That's the first thing. Then you've got an issue, because that's his issue against the defense of Rav. And then there's this issue where the first remark was made, it's outside of court. But our Mishnah states in court. So it's significant because in order for you to pay the one for surcharge, the principal, and the Asham offering, it has to be in court, and it has to go through the court-imposed process where the defendant has been adjured by the court, not the plaintiff. Okay? And after the defendant takes a court-imposed oath, he actually remains liable to pay. And that seems in contradiction to Rav, it would seem. So Rav Hamnuna posed a challenge, and he resolved the question, because he's basically saying, if you want to think that Rav made this blanket statement that no matter what, the defendant doesn't pay, it's not the case. Because there's two separate cases. So the clause he had him adjured means the court imposed the oath. That's number one, guys. And that's a case where he's saying, Rav Humna, that could have occurred outside the court. And the clause referring to an oath in court applies specifically where the plaintiff interfered and jumped up and personally adjured the defendant. So Rav Hamnuna is basically saying, if you want to say it's outside the court, then we can say that even if the court adjured him, it's still outside the court proceedings, and therefore it's not enough to be an oath which protects the custodian. Or if you want to say it's in court, you can say that the plaintiff interfered with the process, and that therefore it wasn't a court adjured oath, and that would get the defendant to be convicted if witnesses come, and his false oath would not get him off the hook. Okay. So Rav Hamnuna's challenge to Rav from the Mishnah, which states that the defendant could have retracted and admitted liability, was apparently based on the assumption that Rav means to exempt the perjurer, even if he eventually admits his guilt, and the assumption is challenged. Why? Because Rava challenged Rav Hamnuna from the following brisa. If the householder, who's the householder, guys, the unpaid custodian, claims a claim of theft by a thief regarding a deposit that he had been safekeeping, and he swore to that effect, but then afterwards felt guilty and admitted that he himself took the item, and he had sworn falsely, and also witnesses came and testified that he took the item for himself, this is the law. If he admitted his guilt before the witnesses came and testified against him, he's entitled to a teshuva because he came clean before witnesses came, and therefore he pays the principal, the one for surcharge, and he brings an asham offering. Okay, but if he admitted his guilt only after the witnesses came and testified against him, he pays the twofold payment. Why? Because it's a careful payment. the kefil payment, the only reason that a thief does not pay double is if he comes clean before testifying falsely and says, I did wrong, I took. Otherwise, he pays double if he troubles the court. So why does he bring in Asham offering? Now, that research we discussed on Saturday night is because after witnesses came, he felt bad and he admitted he was wrong. So therefore, the Asham is to Hashem. And if you're asking, what about the one for surcharge to the plaintiff, he's paid it. Because if he's paying double, he's paying 200% instead of 120%. So in other words, if he, within that, he's paying 80% more for only coming clean after the witnesses. So within the kefil payment is one for surcharge to the victim, as well as the Asham offering to Hashem. So he's paying the kefil. The one for surcharge is for his teshuva within that, and the Asham offering is within that to Hashem, because he did admit afterwards. But obviously the twofold payment includes the principal. There's no question. And the Asham. Now here you can't say that the Brisa refers to a case where the defendants swore outside the court. Why? Because then there's no kefil payment, guys. And you can't say it's a case where the plaintiff jumped up and personally adjured the victim in court, because the Brisa states that if witnesses testified against him, he's liable to pay the twofold payment. And we learned that if he swore before a court and without and through the court without the plaintiff adjuring him, but the court adjures him, that false oath that he makes gives him the protection not to pay because we trust it. However, even if witnesses come afterwards, however, that has to be in court and has to be imposed by the court. But the Brisa rules that whether he confessed and it was contradicted by witnesses after swearing falsely, he's got to pay the principal. So what the Gemara is saying is, if Rav meant to exempt the perjurer in all cases, you're not going to reconcile his opinion with the Brisa, because this is saying opposite to Rav. So Rava therefore redefines Rav's ruling, and he says, any case where the defendant admits that he swore falsely, doesn't matter whether he claimed that he swore that the deposit was lost or it was stolen and taken by a thief. In that particular case, we give him the opportunity of teshuvah, even if he makes a false oath, and he's entitled then to pay the principal, the one for surcharge and the Asham offering. And then if he admits afterwards, and there were a case where witnesses come, in that particular case, we're going to do that now. So Rav didn't say that his oath exempts him from payment. Why? Because it's written in the Torah that one who confesses that he must pay the principal and the surcharge of 1/5. Okay, now there's a slight distinction here. Where the defendant claims that the deposit was taken by a thief and witnesses say that he took it for himself, Rav also did not say that the oath exempts him from payment. Why? Because it says that when the custodian claims that it was stolen from him and he makes a false oath, he's liable for kefil, because he said a thief took it. He himself is a thief and he's treated as a thief, and therefore he makes the twofold payment. So we want to know, when did Rav say that a custodian oath exempts him from payment? He said it only in a case where the custodian claims the deposit was lost. What do we mean lost? That, for example, it wasn't a human being that stole the sheep. A wolf came and took the sheep, and he swears falsely. And he didn't confess. He sticks to his guns, guys, and he says, no, this is what happened, and witnesses come and testify to his guilt. So nowhere does the Torah impose a payment upon him. And Rav interprets the verse, and its owner shall accept it, and the defendant shall not pay, as teaching that once the defendant has sworn in a case of something that was lost, as opposed to stolen by a human being, he doesn't want it to teshuvah. He's adamant, and witnesses come against him, and it's within a court-imposed setting, and an oath done and adjured by the court and not interfered by the plaintiff, he is protected by that particular oath. Please note, Kevin in Shemaim is fully responsible, but it protects him in that particular case and only in that limited case. So,
actually very clever that.
It is very clever. It actually is.
From Hashem, I mean, just to put that in, it's just genius.
It's very, very clever. Very, very clever.
Say that again, please.
Gav, tell Kevin.
I can't even give that over. I'm hearing it. I can't, Damon. I'm finished now. Please give it over. I'm hearing every word, but I'm backwards and forwards. My brain fog's tremendously bad tonight.
Okay, so Kevin, all we are saying is as follows: is that Rav put a very limited set of circumstances where the oath protects the custodian. Okay. Number one, it has to be a court adjured oath, meaning there's a rabbi with a Torah scroll and gives warnings to the custodian that if he lies falsely, there's going to be all these spiritual dire consequences. Okay? And he has to use Hashem's name, and that is imposed by the court, and it has to be within the court possession, within the court building, and not outside the court. So it cannot be informal that it's physically outside the court, nor can it be informal where the plaintiff says to him, I know you stole it. You swear to me you didn't steal it, or say on mine that you didn't swear it, that you didn't steal it. Okay, and in that particular case, he does say on mine. Then what the plaintiff did do in that case is he protected himself, because it doesn't then protect the custodian, because that's not a legitimate oath that would protect him if witnesses come against him, for two reasons. Is that it's not a court-imposed oath with the right procedures, and the plaintiff adjured him, not the court, and it was, even if it was done in court. And the other factor is, Kevin, is that if he claims that a person stole it from him, he's treated as a thief, and he pays the careful payment. If he admits to it afterwards, and then he brings an Asham offering to Hashem. But if he says that the deposit was lost, meaning like a sheep was taken by a wolf, and witnesses come against him, and he says, no, it was, and the court adjured him with an oath, and the plaintiff didn't get involved, it does protect him against the witnesses, because he's not treated as a thief. He hasn't posed that somebody stole it from him. Only in those circumstances is he protected and his oath is believed. But it doesn't mean that Hashem isn't going to extract the money from him in another way, nor does it mean that he's got protection from Shemaim. He lied with Hashem's name.
Even if he lied
that I was saying was so clever.
Sorry, why is it so clever, Gavin?
No, that last part that Damon was talking about, right at the end now. That last part, if it's what's it called?
Are you saying lost versus stolen?
Yeah, lost versus stolen. Yeah, it's so clever that, because in the one you get away with it in this world. Hashem actually says, you know what, that's it. You know, because you're not actually acknowledging. You know, it's lost as opposed to stolen. I can't answer it now. When I'm feeling better, I'll answer it. I know the answer.
So you're saying the guy,
that's very
custodian,
clever,
made a false oath even in front of the Sefer Torah with the rabbi. He actually still made a false oath.
Yeah, well, you see, that's the thing.
On the Torah.
He was warned about all the spiritual sins that it would occur upon him. He used the Torah, used Hashem's name. If somebody is that degree of despicable, and they're prepared to almost destroy themselves spiritually in order to save a couple of bucks, and witnesses come, and he's claiming it wasn't a case of theft, but it was lost, meaning it was lost in an accident as opposed to a human being stole it from him, then even if witnesses come, we say, okay, we believe you, the defendant, it's fine. But Kevin, he sacrificed a huge amount of Shemaim in order to get off that money, believe it. So, and also Hashem determines, you got in on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem determines what every person earns, and that
Yeah.
if that owner of that sheep was meant to get the money back, he'll do another deal. If he's meant to lose it and he doesn't lose
Yeah.
it with the custodian, he'll lose it some other way. He'll lose it some other way, or he'll gain it some other way. There are no losses when you believe that there's spiritual control of Panos Hashem. There's only losses if you're looking at it from an earthly perspective and you think it's unfair justice system. So if you look at the secular justice system, where we still swear on the Bible today in all cases, you see it. But because it's not held in reverence to the same degree, if two witnesses go against one defendant, it's definitely believed. So the best thing that the plaintiff can do actually is almost adjure the defendant within the court, because then it's not adjured by the court, even if it's inside the court, because then that oath doesn't protect the custodian. And therefore, if witnesses come against the custodian, you can have a claim of a careful payment. So that's what I would do if I was the plaintiff, is I would disrupt the course proceedings on purpose in order to adjure. Do you get what I'm saying, Gavin? So the case is not closed. If witnesses come afterwards.
Can I give you some?
That's
okay, after Gavin, I want to say something.
That's
that whole concept is it's absolutely genius. I just can't give it over, but it's absolutely outstanding. I'm very blown away.
Kev,
Damon, something to remember, maybe for careful payment, it means people have to be careful.
And that's very clever.
I just thought of that the other day.
That's very clever. It's actually very clever. Arth, did you manage to come right? No, don't do that. Arthur. It's not even funny. Shame, man.
Is he coming right?
No, but I must tell you something. I don't blame Arthur for being ticked off. I tell you, it's the most frustrating thing in the world to drop a container full of oil.